Well, hello again, and we're looking now at a little chat between Stewart Dalby and Chris Mullin, a long-time MP. But the two of them were together in their very early careers in Vietnam and Cambodia, and so they're reminiscing a little bit. And I hope that we can actually find the little chat. I always have somehow I always seem to have problems finding these things just at the last minute. Heaven only knows why, but it is Stewart with his former colleague, and we hope that he can have a little fireside chat with Mr. Mullin, and we are supposed to be able to find this very easily, and it never works out that way, never ever, because what we see in the preview doesn't come up in reality, and it's just one of those things. But here we are. This is Stewart with Chris Mullin.
Good morning. This is Stewart Dalby from Mirador Television, and I'm currently speaking to a guest in the studio at the All Saints Church, which is now a venue for meetings and so on. Now, my guest, Chris, I met you first in Cambodia, I think.
Yes, we did.
Or it might have been Laos, you never know.
Cambodia, August 1973.
Yeah. And then you were very, very engrossed, like we all were, weren't we? Really, sort of involved, totally somehow involved.
Well, in that case, the city was said to be, Phnom Penh was said to be surrounded.
Yeah.
And the US Congress had stopped the bombing, had forced Nixon to stop bombing Cambodia.
Yeah.
And it was thought that Cambodia would fall as a result.
Yeah.
And that's why a large party of journalists from all over the world assembled there, including us. But it turned out that the regime held on for another 18 months, didn't it?
Yes, right, yeah. But I mean, the question I want to pose to you is that, when I was in Vietnam and so forth, I did another 10-odd wars for the Financial Times over the years, here, then, everywhere. And why did you want to be a war correspondent?
Well, I didn't want to be a war correspondent, really. I wanted to be a useful journalist.
Right.
And I was on the Daily Mirror training scheme, which operated on a number of local newspapers down in Devon, at the end of which we were offered a job on one of the Mirror's titles, and in my case that was the Sunday Mirror. And I thought, well, this is not really the life for me. So I declined the job offer and paid £81 for a one-way ticket to the Far East and worked backwards.
Right.
I knew that nobody would pay to send me to anywhere interesting, but I thought that if I paid for myself and worked backwards...
Well, that was what happened. John Swain was in the same.
Swain was in a different league to me, though, of course.
No, but he was absolutely flipping well skinned, like you were.
Yes, I was skinned.
But you were saying this morning that the FT put you up in posh hotels. They most certainly did not. The Hotel Royale was a fantastic place, but the old French guy, the old Mr. Octavie, the Corsican.
He was still there, was he?
No, he was there. He was there almost towards the end. And what was made him very famous, he used to have this nose, and he said, Monsieur Dolly, Monsieur. They call him Monsieur Dolly. And Martin Woodcock was called Monsieur Ollerclot. Nicholas Tomoney was Mr. What's-it. So they were all, you got into the whole opium stuff, didn't you? And then you start saying, you can't say Monsieur Grim. So, but do you remember being there and getting in the whole atmosphere?
I do remember being there as well. Yeah. Yes.
Was it sort of an important watershed in your life?
Well, the Vietnam War certainly was.
Yeah.
Even in the isolation of my Catholic boarding school in Essex, in Suffolk, I managed to work out there was something wrong with the official version of events in Vietnam. And so it was always one of my ambitions to get to Vietnam and indeed Laos and Cambodia and see what was going on for myself. And I did. It was actually 3, I think, when I first got to Vietnam. I was in Laos in 1972.
Yeah. Well, to this day, people say to me, why do you want to be a war correspondent? And I still can't explain it. So,
well, I don't think of myself as a war correspondent. I think that's where things were happening at the time. I was broadly sympathetic to the anti-American side, and it wasn't difficult to be, given the terrible things the Americans were doing in those 3 countries. So I wasn't a war correspondent, but I did just turn up there.
Right. Now, okay, when the war was finished over, you returned to the UK, and I think you were married by then, weren't you?
No, I didn't get married until 1980.
Oh, I see. Right.
85.
To a Vietnamese.
I mean, I have a lifelong relationship now with Vietnam, because through my wife's family, I married a Vietnamese woman, and I've been back as recently as last November.
Yes, I go back there all the time, but I get invited back because I stayed on, But anyway, let's move on from that. So after the war, you are a distinguished novelist, a well-known politician, and a nuisance to certain people like myself. So what did you start doing then? Did you have a political career in mind after Vietnam and places like that?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
In fact, I was first a candidate for the Labour Party in North Devon against Jeremy Thorpe in 1970.
Well, that was easy. I'm just reading that book about him. Have you read it?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, God, what a character!
Yes. Well, I was unduly impressed by him, actually. Of course, we didn't know anything about the Norman Scott business hadn't occurred then. But he was a very charismatic man, and I was only a youngster. I was only 22 years old, really far too young to be standing for Parliament. But I was deeply impressed by him.
Yeah, everybody was, but to the extent.
I still have a sneaking regard for him.
He was actually flagrantly gay, wasn't he?
He was gay, but that I don't think that was an issue then. But he was pro-common market in a constituency that was overwhelmingly anti-common market, as it was called in those days. He was liberal on immigration, and there's no doubt the majority of his constituents were very far from liberal. And of course, he was vocally opposed to the death penalty. And I'm sure that although there were no murders in North Devon, as far as I could see, most of his constituents were very keen on the death penalty.
So after that, did you join the Labour Party, presumably?
No, I joined the Labour Party in 1966 or 7.
Okay, and then you wanted to get a seat, and you...
Well, I worked for a little left-wing publication called Tribune.
Oh, yes,
which is the one that George Orwell was the literary editor of. And I became the editor of that between 82 and 84. And then in due course, I was taken on, I got involved in investigating the Birmingham pub bombings case, which
I remember you did, yes, I remember we talked about that.
Innocent people have been convicted. So World in Action, the Granada television program, took me on for some time to try and investigate that. And we made three documentaries. And then in 1987, I was elected to Parliament for Sunderland South.
Ah, that was very interesting. Must have been. Was it a big struggle? What was,
Well, I've been applying to Labour seats for some time before that. I had fought two hopeless ones, North Devon and Kingston on Thames. And so I had been trying for some time, and it was only in 1985 that I finally succeeded in getting the nomination for Sunderland, which was a safe Labour seat. And the election came in 87, and I was duly
so you were during the Wilson years and the Callaghan years and so forth and so on, and all the chaos that was on there. And then we got Mrs. Thatcher. She was well in power in 87, wasn't she?
She certainly was, yes.
Yeah. And so, you talked in your speech about being quite, easy on Mrs. Thatcher. My only public contact with him was she was invited for lunch at the Financial Times. They had these lunches at the top. She came in with a bloody handbag and bunged it on the door over there. I was outraged. I said, put it over there with the coats, Mrs. Thatcher.
And did she?
Yes.
She did. Well, there you are. You're a man of influence. If you could make Mrs. Thatcher bend to your will.
I talk about now, you mentioned it yourself. I abominate Rupert Murdoch because of the way he's destroyed media. And, all these papers now do things that he says, all these papers, then he stokes up imagination and so forth and so on. And basically, his control over the media is very, very dangerous, isn't it? I mean, but Tony Blair, when he was trying to get elected, went on his knees, get calm, Keir Starmer said, Black for the Sun.
No,
not Keir Starmer then, no, of course, who was it? It was Tony Blair.
That's not quite my recollection. Blair worked out at an early stage in the mid-1990s that to stand any chance of election, he would need to neutralise Murdoch. And I agreed with what he did. He was invited to a conference of whatever they were, News International executives on Hayman Island in Australia, and he went. Now, he was much criticised, and I indeed am somebody who wanted to see something serious done about Murdoch. But I thought his strategy was the right one. Go there, laugh at his jokes, slap him on the back. Now, where I part company with Tony Blair is that I would have struck with deadly force about a week after the election.
Yeah. Why is that? What should we have done?
I'd have broken up I'd have forced him to disgorge the Times and the Sunday Times.
Oh,
because he had four national newspapers. I would also have stopped him owning a television station as well. I made him choose between television and newspapers. That would have been my strategy, but I wasn't Prime Minister at the time.
No, they tried to merge Sky with the FT one, didn't they?
Did he? I don't know
at
about
the end,
that.
yes, he did.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. So now at the same time, in parallel with your political career, you had your writing career. And I can remember that amazing, or was it Yes Minister, where you might, which was the one where you said, you might think that, but I couldn't possibly comment.
That wasn't me.
No?
That was a chap called, I can't remember who wrote Yes Minister, but there was a wonderful television series.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yes Minister, and my diaries, which I published since then, have often been compared. Some of the incidents in them have been described as pure Yes Minister.
Well, yeah. Okay, yeah, right. So you were writing your books, and they were selling very well.
I wrote 2 books that sold. I've written altogether now. I think it's about 10.
Yeah.
4 volumes of diaries, 4 novels, an autobiography, and a book called Error of Judgment about the Birmingham pub bombings.
Right. So a lot of your books did actually cover these kind of things. I mean, I was also a correspondent in Belfast as well. So I was very up to speed about it. I can remember the campaign that you launched to actually they got off in the end, didn't they? They were released.
Well, their convictions were eventually quashed. The fact is that the police authorities got the wrong people for all the main IRA bombings in the mid-1970s, by which I mean Guildford, Woolwich, Birmingham, and the M62 coach bombing. And that was a total of 18 people. They all had nothing whatever to do with those atrocities. in due course, all their convictions were quashed and they had to be compensated, but not before they'd served many years in prison.
Yes, yeah. But in all my experience of wars, I went to Vietnam, I was in Africa, I was in Beirut, and I was in Oman and so forth. And somebody said to me recently, which was the most dangerous? I said, Belfast.
Yes.
Let's talk about you again. So you've written all these kind of things, and then you're no longer an MP. So are you a sort of campaigner? Would you regard yourself as
No, not now.
No.
Not now. I mean, what I have written since I would, starting just before I retired from Parliament, I retired in 2010. I've published 4 volumes of diaries. This week I have published the 4th one. The first 3 cover the rise and fall of New Labour from the first moment to the last moment. That's to say, the first one starts on the night John Smith died, and the third one finishes the day Gordon Brown walked out of Downing Street. And I have just published now, at this week, a volume entitled Didn't You Used to Be Chris Mullin? And that is about the 12 years since I retired from Parliament. It's a diary of those 12 years.
So what does that 12 years cover? That would
well,
cover
it begins with soon after the Cameron government took power, and it ends with the death of the Queen in the autumn of last year. So it covers the whole era. Quite a turbulent era, actually. Lots of different prime ministers.
I'll answer if I thought often. I've made myself something of an expert about the energy crisis. I told everybody and so forth and so on. And I got a hold of Cameron wouldn't bring in an energy cap because he was too weary. And that meant that the big oligopolistic cartel, the big 6, British Gas and so forth, were actually making bloody well fortunes by putting their prices just below the cap. And I thought, that I wrote a big article about it, and the Cameron was just very weak-kneed, sort of willy-nilly bloke, really. Don't you agree?
Well, I don't know enough about that issue.
No.
But he was a PR man, fundamentally. Not a bad man, actually. Not particularly right-wing in Conservative terms. But he was ultimately a PR man. And, well, of course, and he made one enormous mistake, and that was to hold a referendum on Brexit.
And they couldn't negotiate with the others, could he? They wouldn't listen to him.
Well, there's some truth in that, but he should never have held that stupid referendum in the first place.
No, I agree totally with you. Last Remainers do. I mean, it was just...
He did it to sort out a dispute within the Conservative Party. It wasn't. There was no great pressure among the public for such a referendum. It was about 8th or 9th on the list of issues that the public were concerned about. But it was a very hot topic in the Conservative Party among the 170,000 people who are members of the Conservative Party. And he did it in the hope of resolving that. And of course, and it never occurred to him, not even for a single moment, that they would lose. And so it came to pass. The rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history. Now, for example, let's modernise a bit. I happen to know Boris Johnson. I've known him for a long time. I knew his father, Stanley, and his sister, Rachel, used to sit next to me, so I knew very well. And I started telling people things like, I said, look, when Boris was in power, he filled his cabinet with second-rate people because he thought none of them would usurp him. So when he got out, we were left with nobody fit to run the country. And that was one of Boris' very smart thing to do. I don't know whether you would agree with that now that we are, because of that, because there's somehow nobody now capable to run the flipping place, in my opinion. I mean, you.
Well, that's a common trait amongst people of our vintage to say that it would all be better if we were in charge. I'm not sure it would be, but yes, I'd like to think so.
But also, I mean, the whole thing about Boris getting back in, and the sort of country, and now, you know, here that in this town, the 21 Conservative councillors were wiped out. All right. My take on it is that the Green Party, who is, in my opinion, incredibly incompetent, day has come. They're young people, all worried now about climate change and so forth. And I said, I bet you to the Liberal Democrats say they're going to get a majority, and they did. And so it's very, very difficult times, isn't it, really? You've got two parties, one which has disappeared, and the other one which is incompetent.
Well, under the first past the post system, you're going to end up with one or other of the main parties, of two main parties in office. Conservatives seem to be pretty heavily discredited, though I've no doubt come the general election, once our free press has got to work, the gap will be narrower than we suspect at the moment.
Yeah.
A lot will depend on Scotland, incidentally.
Yes, because they used to have a huge Labour majority.
When I retired from Parliament in 2010, Labour had 42 of the 56 seats, and now they have one. And so, and it would appear that the Nationalists are beginning to implode at last. The extent to which they do so could determine the outcome.
Why do you say at last? Do you think it's been brewing up all the time?
Well, it's been predicted for a long time, but it never happened up till.
Well, they weren't.
They didn't do well in the 2017 election.
That's because
they began to lose seats.
Well, Simon buggered it, didn't he? Because he had all these young chicks do it, and they started messing around and stuff.
Well, I don't know about that, but all I can say is that they did lose quite a few seats in 2017. Also, I think, although it might not have been popular in the south of England, Corbyn was quite popular in Scotland. But then, of course, the Nationalists regained most in the 2019 election. So we'll see what happens, but my guess is that they will, both Labour and the Conservatives will win more seats in Scotland.
Yeah, looks like it. It does. Yeah. That's very good. So you're quite interested in politics, quite strongly, aren't you now? Still.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I tend to sort of ignore it now, but you can't, can you?
Not really.
So, what else can we talk about? You didn't mention a lot about. Now, I'm very interested in your views on Corbyn, and you're saying, "Oh, he's really quite a nice bloke somehow. He helps the old ladies across the road."
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I've known Jeremy for about 40 years, and he'd been absolutely hopeless Labour Party leader or Prime Minister, but he's a thoroughly decent human being, in my view. And I deprecate the way in which he's been smeared and turned into some sort of alleged racist. It's all nonsense.
Well, again, I keep saying, like now with Keir Starmer, as a charisma bypass. That's the thing. Now, because politics has been invaded by celebrities, charisma is a very, very important. I mean, people don't vote for Boris; they vote for the Conservatives. They vote for Boris. I vote for him because he's very good on television. You see, the politics actually has colonised it all, hasn't it? Don't you think?
Well, celebrity politics.
Yeah.
So celebrities have taken over much of our public life, not just politics, actually.
Yeah.
We're sitting here in the week of the Eurovision Song Contest. So, yes, there is such a thing as celebrity politicians. I suppose Blair was one by the end, and certainly Boris was.
And probably Trump was the latest one.
And Trump, of course, yes. And it was all due. I mean, his prominence was all down to that program he ran. I've forgotten what it was called.
Well, yeah, Apprentice.
Apprentice, yes.
Yeah. You see, everybody thinks. Remember, it was like, I don't know, when he got in, because he had a lot of money, they thought they were all going to be made rich. And that's the same kind of thing, because hockey made a lot of money rather discreditedly. And they think, no, he's made us very rich, I'm going to vote for him, sort of thing. But I was just chuckling the other day, I think, right, what they should do is have Andy Norman as the Prime Minister and Angela Rayner as the Foreign Secretary, because she oozes charisma. I don't know that.
I don't know them either.
There you go. Right, well, thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Okay, well, I'd be grateful if you would mention my latest volume of diaries, which is called Didn't You Used to Be Chris Mullin?
Yeah.
And which was published last week.
Right.
The reason for the title is that I was going around the House of Commons some years after I retired, and a former colleague came up to me and he looked at me over the top of his glasses like this, and he said, "Didn't you used to be Chris Mullin?" and so I said, "Thank you. That will do as the title of Volume 4.
Right, well,
and here it is.
Right. Now, before we close, I'd just like to say that Chris Mullin, somebody I've known for many, many years, and he's been here in Lewes today for the festival, and his book has been launched, and he's written the full volume of his diaries, and they're very, very well worth reading. And as I say, do have a look at them because they're very well worth reading. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
That's all.
Parkinson's disease. Not totally understood, not totally appreciated by the general public. There are so many other things, particularly cancer-related diseases, that top the headlines, that get the attention. But Parkinson's can be devastating. It affects the brain, you see. It eats away at that little bit which controls movement. It shows those bits and pieces that are not obvious most of the time, but when they're in the spotlight, they are. I've got Parkinson's, and as my consultant says, sometimes I wouldn't know it, Keith. You walk in here with a bounce. Well, I used to, and I can't bounce anymore. Over a 10-year period, I've deteriorated. And over the last 12 months, I've deteriorated faster than I did in the first 9. But I don't want this disease to win. And I am, along with a lot of other people, determined that it won't win. Muhammad Ali, Michael J. Fox, Billy Graham, Neil Diamond, a whole host of other people, well known and famous, all of whom fight like hell to try and get this disease understood and to do something to beat it. We haven't beaten it yet, but it's not for the want of trying. Now, what's Parkinson's, you may say? You've seen people who involuntarily shake like this. You can't see me. Can't see me walking at the moment, but I shuffle. As I said, the thing that really upsets me is I'm shuffling like an old man. And one good friend and kindly looked me in the eye and said, "You are an old man." And so I manifest both being old but also it is showing that Parkinson's is slowly getting the better of me. But it's not really getting the better of me. It's just that my body is degenerating. And by the time that I'm actually 120, I'll be gone. No, I jest. And I jest because the only thing that I can do is to jest. Is to make fun of this damn disease. So it doesn't get the better of me. To laugh at it. To say, go away. Get stuffed. Go and bother somebody else. Leave me alone. And it's that positive attitude that actually does help temper it, but it doesn't stop it. And there are researchers all over the globe trying hard to find some cure, some remedy to try and make this dreadful disease a little bit more palatable and eventually to go away. They haven't reached it yet. I was watching a little commercial for Action Cancer, Research Action Cancer, I think it is, who are very prominent on the high street, on television, in the papers, and they make an appeal for cash. This isn't really an appeal for cash. I'm not going to ask you to give £3 for a puppy or £3 for a llama or £3 for some poor child in Africa with a disease that on the surface looks 10 times worse than Parkinson's. Not a bit of it. I just want to help other people like Jeremy Paxman, who's also a sufferer and has started a unique and interesting vlog or blog or whatever you call them to try and bring sufferers together. I simply just want to help make it evident that Parkinson's exists and needs fighting the same as anything else. If you feel like putting your hand in your pocket and sending a few bob to Parkinson's, I think it's called Parkinson's UK, please do so. But I'm not twisting your arm. I would just like you to be able to recognize when you see somebody like this, to say, Parkinson's. I remember now. That definitely hates it. Because it's awareness that will help, not the pennies that you either will or will not give out of your purse. It's an awareness. And to give those of us who suffer a bit of backup when we're trying to be as positive as we are. Or we're trying to fight it in our own particular way. You know, it's he said, people can be very unkind, you know. Another friend said, Keith, I will not go to the pub with you. Well, the moment you get inside that pub, you start to stagger. And you haven't had a drink. He said, it's very embarrassing indeed. But I suppose it is. But I pointed out to him and I said, look, here I am, just to help you, staggering around, pretending to be drunk. Well, there are a whole host of a group of people in here staggering because they are drunk and pretending not to be. Now, which do you want? Come on, put your hand in your pocket and buy that pint. Yes, it has its downside. It can embarrass people. Doesn't bother me. Any whoever suffers from any disease doesn't bother me. And to be quite honest with you, I'm very lucky because most of my friends it doesn't really bother. They make light of it and they joke about it the way that I do. And I do joke about it. Get lost. Stop it. Stop bothering me. I'm a busy man. I'm a very important man. I'm a VIP. That's as daft as me having Parkinson's. But it is one of those things that really will benefit far more than sending cash, than an awareness So when you're watching me, and they call me Mr. Keith, become aware of Parkinson's. Become aware of the devastation it can cause to many people who, when it hits them, are so upset and so worried by it, is they can't actually find the strength or the courage initially to tell it to bugger off. I told it that from the very start, and I'm glad I did. And yes, I've had my falling down periods. And there's nothing worse than falling down because you're suddenly out of control. You can't stop it. The only thing is that I have learned over the years how to fall without hurting myself, mostly anyway. You pick up little tips like that. I'm not going to keep you for much longer. This is to say, stand firm with us. Stand firm with those of us who have got Parkinson's. Because it's the awareness. It's the fact that we can be tough enough to tell it to stop bothering us. And that's what will eventually find a cure. Yes, the pennies are important. If you have got a penny, turf it in. If you haven't, don't worry. Just get together with us and tell people, tell the disease, enough is enough. Go back to where you came from, and don't let things get on top of us. So that's my message for this week. Yes, it's a little message, isn't it? But there are tons and tons of people out there like me who got Parkies. Some, it bothers beyond compare. Others, if it's going to get me, it's going to have to come and get me. I'm not walking into it. I'm not giving into it. And I'd ask you to support me in that way. Should I have another little burst on a Sunday? Last time it was at breakfast time. It's been a rotten day today outside. So it's late afternoon on a Sunday before I go. And I still get up at 5:30 tomorrow morning. I shall be up and happen and back, making sure that this television station goes on air at approximately the right time. I say approximately because sometimes we're a couple of minutes late. That's dreadful in the television industry to do that. But that's my concession. Thanks for being with me. Thanks for giving me your support. And if you see me in the pub, just because I appear to be shaking, don't think that I won over the 8. I probably only had 1, so I got capacity for another 7. And it's your shout. Toodle, toodle, pip. Well, there you are. I'm sorry that the gremlins struck again, and just towards the end of the chat between Stewart Dalby and his guest, the picture went skew-if again. But I'm sure that you got most of the body of his chat and an interesting career that Chris Mullin had in Parliament. It's 4 minutes to 11 o'clock. We've had quite a full morning, starting off with everything going wrong, the whole system breaking down. But you'll be pleased to know that we did not pause in our seeking a perfect beer. And Kevin, true to his word, got behind the bar, poured it, and offered it to me to test to make sure that the White Hart is offering the very best beer that money can buy. That will pass muster. That will pass muster. and the other lager that's on tap. Oh, tastes all the better because I'm having it before 10 o'clock. But in 3 minutes' time, the bar will be open, and you can come into this. You can come into this hotel, and you can enjoy a glass of beer or a glass of wine or whatever, and relax. I'm going to actually say toodlepip, except just to remind you that this morning we changed things around a little bit, so that our resident barrister Richard Burton was on about the Coote case, which is in this court in 2002. A retrial went to the Old Bailey a year later, but it was a noted case of its time, and the Coote is still lying in prison, banged up for a very long time, even though it was tried by his defense to get a manslaughter charge instead of a murder charge. But the judge and the jury were not having anything of it. Then we went to Stewart. Well, we took a look at the news. We reviewed the news as we normally do, just out of a different time slot. And then we went to Stewart and Chris Mullin for a chat, about the Speakers Festival, which has just completed a very successful weekend in Lewes, and also on the same day as the Battle of Lewes was reenacted. So we were all in many ways about communication, about freedom of speech, about democracy. And that's really what we're all about, the democratic process. And those who attempt to tamper with it have us to deal with. Oh, yes, we're a tiny little outfit. But it's amazing how acorns develop into good, strong oaks. I'm delighted that I just got the figures in for this week's viewing, and just on one outlet alone, we got 1,200 viewers, which means that we are still probably increasing our target audience of 3,000 to 5,000, because that was just daily, and the way these figures are calculated is on a month. So it wouldn't surprise me if we're doing quite well, and we're grateful. And we hope, even though you may only dip in for a minute or two, is that you enjoy being with us, and you find our fumble bum efforts from time to time outweighed by the fact that the stuff that you can see, the content, is well worthwhile. Righto. Until tomorrow, when Stewart will be along, and we're going to take a look at our second chapter in the North Street development, and what's going on down there. Oh, yes. You'll be back with us and share our thoughts and our words and who is who in the race to get the quarter housing project going, and those that are very uneasy about it. Till tomorrow. Toodlepip.